So good morning everybody. So at the outset, I want to convey my sincere thanks to Professor Pandey for giving me a chance to participate in this instruction course and say a few words about ocular myasthenia gravis. As we all know, myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disorder in which antibodies are formed against acetylcholine receptors of the motor end plate involuntary muscles, resulting in fluctuating weakness of the involved muscles. So this figure simplifies the pathophysiology of myasthenia gravis. On the left, we see the normal photograph of the neuromuscular junction in which the normal acetylcholine receptors are depicted. And on the right side is a patient with myasthenia gravis in which the acetylcholine receptors have been knocked down by the antibodies, and so the acetylcholine release is degenerated acceleratedly. So generalized myasthenia gravis is characterized by weakness and fatigability of the cranial, limb and respiratory muscles mainly. Then ocular myasthenia gravis is characterized by weakness and fatigability of the eyelid or extraocular muscles. 90% of the patients with myasthenia gravis have ocular findings, and 50% patients of the myasthenia gravis initially they present with some ocular findings, and most of such patients they ultimately go into generalized myasthenia gravis over a span of 2 years, and pure ocular myasthenia gravis is seen in 20% of the cases. So the cardinal features of ocular myasthenia gravis include the ptosis, diplopia and orbicularis oculi weakness. The characteristics of these features being an abrupt or insidious onset, variables and associated with the fatigability, and diurnal variation is noted in these features, which are more marked in the evening. Then spontaneous emissions and exacerbations are well known. So ptosis in ocular myasthenia gravis may occur in isolation or along with diplopia. It may be unilateral or bilateral, and in bilateral cases it can be symmetrical or asymmetrical. So degree of ptosis is variable, worsening later in the day. Then ptosis may exhibit fatigability, Cogan's lid twitch, lid hopping, curtaining and enhancement phenomena, and retraction of the contralateral eyelid. So to elicit this fatigability test, the patient is asked to maintain a sustained up gaze for some time, and if we observe over the period the degree of ptosis increases, we call it a positive fatigability test. Then Cogan's lid twitch may also be associated. Patient is asked to look up after looking down for some time, that is after some resting period, and eyelid briefly over elevates and then quickly falls. This probably occurs because of the buildup of acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction during the resting period. So this photograph depicts the Cogan's lid twitch, in which after rest, when the patient looks up, there is sudden over elevation which again comes down. Then lid hopping may also be associated with the ptosis, that is fluttering of the ptotic eyelid occurs on attempted lateral gaze. Then you can establish even the curtaining and enhancement phenomena. Curtaining is occurs when in asymmetrical cases the more ptotic eyelid is elevated manually, the fellow eyelid drops. And similarly, if in symmetrical cases one eye is elevated manually, this ptosis increases. That's called the enhancement of the ptosis. And these phenomena are supposed to occur because of Harring's law of equal innervation. Then contralateral lid retraction is also associated with the ptosis, especially in unilateral cases. So it disappears when the ptotic eyelid is elevated manually or it is covered, and again is explained by Harring's law of equal innervation. Then ocular motor dysfunctions in or alone or in association with ptosis are also known, and any pattern may be noted either in the form of pseudo-internuclear ophthalmoplegia or a pseudo-third nerve or pseudo-fourth nerve or sixth nerve palsy, or sometimes as a pseudo-cavernous syndrome. So diplopia noted in ocular myasthenia gravis is usually variable. One muscle involvement is more common, commonest being the medial rectus, but multiple muscles may also be involved, and then it may or may not be associated with the ptosis. Then third cardinal feature of ocular myasthenia gravis is the orbicularis oculi weakness, which is very common of occurrence. Then these are muscles which are commonly involved. They include the levator palpebralis scoliosis, extraocular muscles, orbicularis oculi, proximal limb muscles, muscles of facial expression, mastication, speech, and neck sensors. So these are the photographs of few patients. I am thankful to Dr. Professor Pandey who has provided me these photographs. So these patients of superior division third nerve palsy, he was ultimately diagnosed to have ocular myasthenia gravis. Another patient having superior division third nerve palsy. Then a patient with right inferior rectus palsy ultimately found out to be OMG. Another patient with isolated right inferior oblique palsy found out to be OMG. Then orbicularis involvement, weakness. Up-gaze palsy with bilateral ptosis has also been reported by Professor Pandey. Then once we see, as Dr. Pandey has already highlighted, our OMG should be the last diagnosis after exclusion. So for OMG patient, we need to exclude the progressive external ophthalmoplegia, oculopharyngeal dystrophies, thyroid eye disease, any intracranial mass lesion and synostosis. And if these are associated with generalized feature, then Lambert-Eaton syndrome, botulism and myopathy should also be excluded. So we should not jump onto direct diagnosis. We need to do more than one test, and these can be clinical tests, pharmacological tests, hematological tests, radiological investigation and electrodiagnostic tests. So the typical clinical features and testing which I have already discussed, that is fatigability test, Cogan's lid twitch, lid hopping, curtaining and enhancement phenomena and contralateral detection. In addition to these, we can also perform the sleep test and the eyes test. So to perform the sleep test, patient is made to lie spine with eyelids closed in a quiet darkened room for about 30 minutes. So improvement in the ptosis and or eye movements indicates a positive sleep test. So reappearance of such signs may occur over the next 5 seconds to 5 minutes. Then eyes test is performed by keeping an ice pack placed on the more ptotic eyelid for about 2 minutes, and again improvement in the ptosis indicates ocular myasthenia gravis. Then pharmacological test, tensilon test is performed by intravenous injection of hydrophonium, that is a rapidly acting and quickly hydrolyzed anticholinesterase. Initially we give a test dose of 0.2 cc, see for any side effects or any effects, and then we can either give a bolus dose of 0.8 cc or we can start with an incremental dose of 0.2 cc every 30 seconds till the improvement starts occurring. A response occurs within 36 seconds of a bolus dose and lasts for about 2 to 5 minutes, and during this duration we must look for change in the ptosis or the diplopia. So this patient shows the ptosis in the right eye which disappears after the tensilon test. Alternative pharmacology tests can be done using neostigmine 0.6 mg atropine along with 0.6 mg atropine sulfate, and it is given intramuscularly, and again change in the ptosis or ocular motility occurs after 15 to 30 minutes. Then anticholinesterase antibodies as a hematological test can be done, and it is present in 80 to 90% of the generalized myasthenia gravis and only in about 50% of the patient with ocular myasthenia gravis. Further, these levels of these antibodies have no correlation with the disease activity. Then other hematological tests which can be performed, they include thyroid function tests, because in 25% of the cases myasthenia gravis patients have concurrent thyroid eye disease. Then anti-nuclear antibody to rule out the association with rheumatoid arthritis and ESR. Then electromyography, a repetitive stimulation test is positive in 20 to 30% patients with ocular myasthenia gravis. A single fiber EMG performed through eyelid muscle or forehead has shown 85 to 100% of sensitivity. Then the chest CT can be required, especially thinking of association with the thymoma. So thymomas are reported in 10 to 15% of patients with generalized myasthenia gravis. In OMG they are rare, but when they occur, they warrant at least surgery. Then coming on to the treatment. So when to treat? Mild cases may not need treatment because spontaneous remissions are well known. The aim of the management is to improve the quality of life by decreasing the symptoms, prevent or limit the severity of myasthenia gravis, and to minimize the side effects of the drugs. And the modalities include medical, surgical and sportive methods. So in medical treatment, we can divide into the withdrawal of medications which can cause it, then anticholinesterase agents, use of immunosuppressives and plasmapheresis. So withdrawal of medication that might exacerbate myasthenia gravis is the first step in the management, and there is a long list of such drugs which includes cardiac drugs, antibiotics, anti-epileptics and antipsychotics, and the most common of these being aminoglycosides and beta blockers. That's very important. Then we can use the anticholinesterase, the pyridostigmine, though it is less effective in pure ocular myasthenia gravis. 50% patients do respond. Ptosis responds better than diplopia. Then side effects like gastrointestinal disturbances may be disturbing. Then contraindications include the bradycardia, reactive airway disease and benign prostatic hyperplasia. Then alternately we can also use neostigmine either orally or even intramuscularly. The important point to note is that the over-treatment may lead to a cholinergic crisis. Then immunosuppressive agents, the corticosteroids are quite useful in these conditions. Usually we start with low doses and increase slowly until the symptoms improve, then a maintenance dose for resolution, and improvement of ptosis and diplopia is reported in about 70 to 90% of the patients. Then we have to taper the steroids slowly. Even after slow taper, the recurrences are common. Then other immunosuppressive like cyclosporine and azathioprine, they are occasionally used in ocular myasthenia gravis because of their toxicity concerns. Their indication includes when patients resistant to steroid or in patients where we need to reduce steroid because of significant side effects. Then certain other drugs have also been recently introduced and they are also under trial. Then intravenous immunoglobulin and plasmapheresis is usually not required in ocular myasthenia gravis. They are used in the acute management of generalized myasthenia gravis. Then surgical treatment in the form of thymectomy has certain definite indications, that is generalized myasthenia gravis in adult patients and in those who are having thymoma. Ocular myasthenia gravis without thymoma, this is not recommended at all. Then supportive treatment is all which is required once diagnosis is made. For ptosis, we can use ptosis crutches. Ptosis surgery usually not recommended. However, in long-standing and severe cases, frontalis sling has been tried. Then for diplopia, again, patching is the best option because prisms they do relieve, but because of their variability, sometimes it becomes difficult to maintain with prisms, and strabismus surgery has a poor outcome ultimately. So future options include the vaccines, and early immunosuppressions are under trial and many studies have come on this. So to conclude, I would like to say that 90% of the patients with myasthenia gravis have eye findings. Ptosis and diplopia either in isolation or in combination being the commonest presentation. Then 50% of the patients of the myasthenia gravis, they present with ocular findings first, and most such cases ultimately convert to generalized myasthenia gravis. Only 20% of the patients are purely ocular. So diagnosis is often more challenging, as I already said in the beginning. So it should be the last option by ruling out all other conditions. And further, we should not rely upon a single finding or a test. Always seek a neurological opinion to rule out the associated or the causal conditions. Then treatment usually requires 2 or more drugs, and surgery should be deferred as far as possible. Thank you for your patient hearing.